Hey, have you ever wondered what kind of kami-yato is supposed to be? I mean, Bishamon and Ebisu and the rest of the gods are actual gods from Japanese pantheon, but what about him? Well, I'm not gonna answer that question because he's made up. But the question that I am going to answer today is, what gods are the gods from the Noragami actually? Because you might be asking yourself a question, are they Shintoist gods or Buddhist gods, or where are they from, and why is it so unclear that we don't know which religion they belong to? First though, let's talk about what Noragami actually is about for those of you that might not know, which I would be surprised because apparently Noragami is the 18th most popular anime according to Mal.
It tells a story about a minor deity, or a kami as we would call him in Japanese, Yato, who, because he became almost completely forgotten by humans, started doing all the jobs for worshippers, calling himself a delivery god in hope to again earn the love of people. He really wasn't doing a great job at being worshipped though, but his life started changing after meeting a human girl turned half Ayakashi by the name of Ikihiyori. His endeavors basically consist of him trying to get a shrine for himself, building relationships with other gods, and trying to turn Hiyori back to normal. Noragami has quite a colorful cast of characters, with the 7 gods of fortune playing the major role, alongside our unidentified protagonist. We've got the vengeful but caring Bishamon, phlegmatic Ebisu, insightful and trustworthy Tenjin, charismatic Kofuku trying to trick everyone into thinking she's one of the 7. Then even characters from the oldest Japanese mythology starts appearing and we meet Izanami, and from what I know, even Amaterasu has her time in the manga.
But wait a minute, how is it that in one world we have gods with their origins in Buddhism like the 7 gods of fortune, and then on the other hand we also have gods from Shintoism like Tenjin, Amaterasu and Izanami, and even Kofuku, who is also trying to pass as the Buddhist one even though she is a Shintoist god? How is that possible? To actually understand that, we need to first talk about what Buddhism and Shintoism are and how they appeared in Japan.
Shintoism is an indigenous polytheistic religion of Japan, with its beliefs getting more clear around the Yayoi period, but the practices can be traced even to the Jomon period. So it is safe to say that Shintoism in some shape or form appeared and evolved alongside the Japanese people. Its main premise is the belief in kami, with its name meaning the way of kami. Kami are a type of deity, god or a spirit, a supernatural being that are believed to inhabit all things, and they have a very strong connection with nature. There are gods out there that represent basically anything, really. It is quite hard to create one definition of Shintoism because the religion is at its core unorganized, dynamic and very diverse. It was structured into hierarchies of priests and shrines, but the beliefs depend on the region, time and people, to be honest, so it's pretty hard to categorize everything and compile it into a holy script, for example. Which Shinto doesn't have, just as it doesn't have a founder. It's just a collection of many beliefs of all the people living in Japan, at some point put under the umbrella of Shintoism. Ellen Hardaker, or at least I hope that's how you pronounce her name, stated that Shinto encompasses doctrines, institutions, rituals and communal life based on kami worship. So the main thing that needs to appear for something to be considered a Shinto practice is kami. Anything else is not needed, meaning that new beliefs or gods can appear anytime, just as old ones can disappear if people stop believing or worshipping them. So basically, if someone convinces enough people that something is a form of kami, then it becomes a kami. Anything anyone believes in goes. That's why we can't really tell how many gods there are in Japanese pantheon. There are said to be around 8 million of them, but that's just a rough estimate, considering how dynamic the religion is. There is, however, a set of gods known throughout the country and considered the most important ones, with the heavenly trio being the most holy of all, consisting of Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, Tsukuyomi, god of the moon, and Susanoo, god of the winds. The absolute basis of the belief is that 2 demiurge gods, Izanami and Izanagi, birthed all the Japanese islands and everything that inhabits it, people and kami alike. As I said before, Shintoism now has hierarchies and is more organized in some of its aspects. It happened around the time of Taika reforms, which reorganized the country, heavily copying the Chinese methods. Those reforms resulted in organizing Shintoism and putting it into more administrated organization with hierarchies of priests and shrines, and the responsibility for making all of that work laid in the hands of the Department of Shinto Affairs. So saying that Shintoism is completely unorganized would be a lie, but it's only a part of official religion that is put into those brackets. Anything that wasn't considered official lived its own life, creating more and more kamis and beliefs. That's why today we can clearly distinguish 3 types of Shintoism. Well, 4, but the 4th one would be a sect Shinto and as such shouldn't be a part of this discussion. First, we have the Shrine Shinto, so the official Shinto, which I was just talking about. Then, seemingly the most important and the most untouchable and unchangeable, Imperial Shinto, with all the ceremonies performed by the emperor and the religious duties of the rest of the imperial family. Then there would be the third type, the most colorful and diverse, and the biggest type too, Folk Shinto. Under that term, we can find all the gods not officially claimed by the religious organization of Shinto, all the folk beliefs, folk stories about yokais, demons and ghosts, and customs and ceremonies performed and recognized more locally rather than nationwide. Shintoism has a strong connection with nature, as I said before, and because of that, it doesn't really talk much about afterlife or the meaning of life or any philosophical things that we can find in Buddhism considering one's soul. It focuses mainly on the life here and now. That's why Shinto holidays and rituals are made to celebrate life rather than death, like weddings, birth celebrations, or rites of passage.
Now that we have Shinto out of the way, let's talk about Buddhism. But before we start, you need to know that Buddhism is absolutely huge religion with a lot of different branches and diverse and very long tradition, which I was never a fan, I guess, of Buddhism because it's so complicated and philosophical at times. So I'm sorry if I oversimplify some things sometimes. I'm just a simple girl.
I'm also just a girl. Standing in front of
who gets amused by penis festivals. And I can't quite comprehend the complicated teachings of Buddhism, I guess. So if you want to learn some more about this, I'm gonna list some books in the description below. Just so you know, I'm gonna talk mostly about Buddhism in Japan, obviously. And it might be quite different from what it looks like in the other places in Asia or how it looked like originally even, so just have that in mind.
So, Buddhism appeared in Japan around the 5th century and it came from China through Korea, but it was properly introduced in the 6th century. At first, it wasn't really popular, but because Japan started getting heavily influenced by China, Buddhism bloomed as well and already gained a huge following by the Nara period when Todaiji, one of the most important temples, was founded. It didn't come to Japan in its original form though. Buddhism was already a 1,000-year-old religion in the 6th century, and the version that was important to Japan was a Mahayana, so the Great Vehicle, one of two main branches. Buddhism at its core says that the world is a place of suffering which causes our greed and desires. And to free oneself from the circle of rebirths, you must strive to reach enlightenment by behaving accordingly to the Noble Eightfold Path. And those are the basics, but on that grew many different traditions claiming that they know the proper way to achieve it. Mahayana, the type of Buddhism that came to Japan and is present in most East Asian countries, is a new tradition. It claims that there are beings called bodhisattva, or bosatsu in Japanese, that already reached nirvana but are not freeing themselves from the circle just yet in order to help others in reaching the enlightenment as well. So Buddhism also has a pantheon of supernatural beings of its own. The Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas create the group of godlike creatures helping people in living a good life, filled with good deeds, that would let them free themselves from the circle of rebirth. Mahayana is vastly different to the other branch, which claims everyone is responsible for their own soul and there is no helping each other. From that description, we can clearly see that Buddhism focuses mainly on the afterlife, on the state of the soul after death, on the sense of people's action in a grand scheme of things, and the result they have on what happens to people after death. So because of that, the main duties of Buddhism in Japan include funerals and celebrations of the ancestors. Of course, there are many different schools of Buddhism with slightly different teachings, but their main purpose in Japanese religious life remains the same.
So with those two completely different religions existing in Japan, how is it that in Noragami they are so merged in together? Shouldn't there be like a clear distinction between them? Well, let me introduce you to the term of religious syncretism, and it's a term that describes exactly what is happening in Noragami. It means blending, coexisting, or merging two or more religions or sets of beliefs so that they create more or less cohesive new system. And the authors of Noragami didn't just think that they would do that in their manga just so that they could take inspiration from both of the major religions existing in Japan. It's actually something that is happening there.
Around 70% of Japanese people in 2018's survey claimed that they are Shintoists, and around 66% claimed that they are Buddhist. And then around 1% were Christian and 6% didn't claim belonging into any religion.
But hey, that's more than 100% of the population. How is that possible? Syncretism. That's the answer. It is possible because most of Japanese people actually practice Shintoism and Buddhism together. There are people in Japan who try to practice the purer version of each, like Buddhist monks or nuns, and there was also an entire movement in Meiji period of trying to get rid of the Chinese influence and Buddhist influence from Shintoism, but most people in Japan just practice both.
And as we already know, there are distinctions between the two in Japanese culture. Of course, there are different religions, but the purpose in Japanese society of the two is, as I said before, that most of the time Shintoism is associated with things like birth, weddings, and rites of passage, whereas Buddhism with death and ancestors. Because of that kind of segregation of duties, believing in one doesn't mean you have to give up the other. Both of those religions don't step in the way of the other, but rather complement each other. In this peaceful coexisting of the two helps that neither is particularly exclusive, meaning they don't demonize other religions and they can coexist or even incorporate other beliefs without changing its own basic statements.
When Buddhism first appeared in Japan around the 6th century, it wasn't, as I said before, incorporated into the country straight away because people had their own religion and they were quite faithful to it. But eventually Buddhism started blooming in Japan because of the Chinese influence and the view that everything from the mainland is just so cool. Though simple people of Japan, so not to call them peasants, were not so keen on the idea as the, I guess, higher-ups of the society were because, well, they knew Shintoism, they were used to it, and this new Buddhist things was just so complicated with all the sutras and shaved heads and philosophical scripts and, oh, I can relate to that. Anyways, that is why, to appeal to the lower classes of the society, Buddhism naturally, but quite slowly, started taking in some parts of Shintoism.
The supernatural creatures, bodhisattvas, that I talked about before, they started blending in with the gods of Shintoism to make Buddhism more appealing to Japanese people. Some of the Buddhist gods were familiarized to resemble Japanese kami, some of the kami became Buddhist gods all of a sudden, or got associated with Buddhist ones like Amaterasu and Buddha Dainichi, and some kami remained Shintoist, but now they could have little shrines on the grounds of Buddhist temples. And here are some of the examples of small Shinto shrines, or just the Torigate, which is a symbol of Shintoism, on the grounds of some, sometimes even major, Buddhist temples. Oh, and with this picture I feel a bit weird showing you a grave, but it's in my opinion a very interesting example of how thin of a line there is between Shintoism and Buddhism right now in Japan. This is one of the graves in Koyasan, which is one of the most important places for Japanese Buddhism, and yet this grave features a pagoda, so a Buddhist symbol, and a Torigate, a Shintoist symbol. And it was not the only one like that. There were actually quite a lot of graves with that kind of structure.
Could you imagine like a small church on the grounds of, I don't know, a synagogue? Absolutely ridiculous idea, but that's what's basically happening in Japan. And because of that, the line between Shintoism and Buddhism became quite thin, and so people just had no reason to choose between one or the other. They just associate different parts of life with one or the other. And that is also why in today's Japan there is 143% of Japanese population living in Japan.
That is also why the gods from those two religions so happily and with no issues whatsoever can walk around killing Ayakashi in Noragami. Our main character, Yato, most probably is supposed to be a Shintoist god. He keeps complaining that he doesn't have a shrine, using a word yashiro, so a Shinto temple, not a Buddhist one. Also, he is said to be a god of calamity and war, so there is no way he could have ever been considered a bodhisattva. Also, as I said earlier, Kofuku is trying to trick people into thinking she is Ebisu, one of 7 Buddhist gods of fortune, but she really is a Shintoist Bimbogami, a god who brings poverty and misfortune on people.
But there are also scripts that say that if you're very welcoming to the Bimbogami, then it becomes a god of fortune, so is Kofuku really lying here?
Talking about gods of fortune, they're all Buddhist gods and most of them have origins in bodhisattvas or Chinese gods of fortune. Only Ebisu seems to have some Japanese origins. That's why Kazuma calls Bishamon Vina. It comes from her Hindu name Vashravana, or at least I hope that's how you pronounce it, more or less.
Also, in the real 7 gods of fortune, she's actually a dude, so let that sink in.
Tenjin, however, is a 100% Shintoist god of academics, and he was a human actually before he became a god. In his previous life, I guess, he was a Sugawara no Michizane, who lived in Heian period and was a famous scholar, politician and a poet.
Which is really not that far away from the idea of someone reaching enlightenment and wanting to help others to reach it too and becoming a bodhisattva, is it? Anyways, that's how in Noragami you can have gods from 2 completely different religions, or even gods from one religion trying to pass as the gods from the other one, and no one bats an eye and no one thinks it's so disrespectful. So isn't Japan just big-brained here? Why have one religion when you can have 2, right?
Both? Both is good.